Here are three ways you can find main ideas on the SAT starting from the beginning. And by the beginning, I do mean the beginning of the passage. A lot of the time with nonfiction texts, the main idea will live at the beginning of the passage, sometimes even the first sentence. So if you want to try this on your own first, go ahead and pause the video and do so. But let's take a look here. We actually have the first sentence, which in our first sentence, we get to dye wool, this person uses plants and vegetables. And with main idea questions, I do encourage you to at least skim through the rest of the passage to make sure that you're not missing anything important. But if you notice that you are getting a broad statement at the beginning of your passage, there's a high likelihood that you're getting at least part, if not all, of the main idea. So let's actually start eliminating literally just based on this. A. Reds and browns are not commonly featured in most of Taylor's rugs. I can already tell that is going to be a distractor answer known as too narrow. That is a detail, but we want a main idea. B. Taylor draws on local resources in the approach she uses to dye wool. B. Taylor draws on local resources in the approach she uses to dye wool. Local resources would be plants and vegetables from Arizona, where she lives. That's local, right? So B looks good. C, Taylor finds it difficult to locate Arizona dock route. That also seems like it's going to be too narrow. D, In the Path of the Four Seasons is widely acclaimed for its many colors and innovative weaving techniques. Again, seems like it's going to be a detail. So our answer is choice B. Now, for other types of passages, you're going to find the main idea lives toward the end of the passage. So if we look at this passage, for example, the beginning of the passage actually starts with having written the impassioned call to arms, something, something in 1791. Anytime that we start with sort of like the beginning of a story, a real story, because this is also going to apply to nonfiction passages. Since they're giving us this date and this tense having written is going to imply that we are at the beginning of some sort of story about this person. That is often an indicator that your main idea is actually going to live at the end of the passage. But let's actually live through this whole thing and I can kind of show you how it leads to the end as the spot for our main idea. Having written the impassioned call to arms letter to Spanish Americans in 1791, this person, Juan Pablo, is often considered a forerunner for the independence movements in Latin America. Often considered is already indicating me that we're perhaps going to get some sort of a contradiction to this, because if he's often considered a forerunner, the next statement could say, in this case, however, and indeed we do get the word but, right? Always get excited about buts. But Viscarda's role in history would have remained insignificant were it not for this guy, Francisco Miranda. So I told you to get excited about buts because but is sort of a transition word, and any transition word is going to point to what's most important a lot of the time. So what we really need to focus on is that this Miranda character is not getting enough attention in this letter to the Spanish Americans, who was handed the unpublished letter after Viscarda's death. And then the last sentence here, we're going to get our main idea. Miranda not only helped circulate the letter, but his edits and footnotes to the text position Miranda as a central figure in the text's creation. So I usually do like to come up with predictions, basically putting the main idea into my own words. I didn't do it for the first one because it seemed really straightforward, but let's kind of put this into our own words. I'm going to say Miranda, key player in letter. All right, moving on to our eliminate step. A, the original authorship is disputed. No. B, the majority of the most eloquently stated arguments were written by Miranda. So this is going to be a distorted answer. You could also think of it as too extreme because it tells us that he had edits and footnotes, but to say that the majority of, basically the best arguments were written by him is not mentioned. It takes it a little bit too far. So you could think of it as extreme. You could also think of it as distorted because it is mentioning Miranda, but then the rest of the information is wrong. So B is out. C, Miranda played a crucial role in influencing the content and distribution of the letter to Spanish Americans. That would make Miranda a key player, and it lines up with editing and adding footnotes and helping circulate the letter. So that seems really strong. I'd probably just choose it and move on. But if you were not feeling as confident, you could look at D. Letter to Spanish Americans persuaded many people to pursue national independence. That doesn't even mention Miranda, so our answer is going to be C for this one. Now, these first two places that you can find the main idea will sometimes get fused together, and you'll have to look at the beginning and the end. I'll show you that in just a second, but I wanted to just let you know that this video is basically a small sample of what I offer in my reading course. If you want 20% off of that reading course, just go ahead and use the link in the description. So here we have a really good example of where the beginning and the end sort of work together to give us the main idea. And again, we're still talking about nonfiction passages. We're going to get to fiction in just a second. I would encourage you to pause the video and try this on your own first, but let's break it down. So we get, for centuries, the widespread acknowledgement of the involvement of the cerebellum, and I'm assuming I don't really need to know what the cerebellum is, in coordinating motor controls in humans has hindered recognition of other possible functions of the structure. So just from this first sentence, I'm getting a lot of context that's telling me that I don't quite have the full picture. I do know that it says we know that the cerebellum has been involved in motor control, but it's saying that it has hindered recognition. That is to say, it's kept us from realizing other possible functions. So I'm assuming we're going to learn about other possible functions. And I'm thinking that the main idea might be, basically that there are other functions beyond motor control. But let's keep reading. Neuroscience research from the last 2 decades now suggests it regulates emotion and social behavior, and recent research by Yaria Karta and colleagues has identified a pathway connecting it to a center for motivation and reward processing. Okay, so yes, I think that first part telling us that, there was this widespread understanding, this last part, but now we know it does other stuff. So my prediction here, sort of combining the beginning and the end, is going to be we knew about MC being motor control, but now we know about other stuff. And you might be wondering why I'm just saying other stuff instead of actually mentioning the other stuff. It's because that other stuff would be considered details, and we should be able to get this without actually knowing what it is. Anyway, A, the recent verification of a pathway confirms its long suspected role in motor coordination. This is going to be sort of the opposite of what is true. That's a distractor answer because it's not long suspected. It's something that we already knew. So A is out. B, recent advances in the field have challenged widely accepted claims about the function of a pathway connecting these guys. Nope, that's not what I predicted. C, the cerebellum has been primarily thought to regulate motor functioning. So that would go to that first part, the beginning. But in recent years, neuroscience research have been uncovering additional functions. So that literally matches my prediction almost in a one-for-one manner. So I would choose that, and that is the right answer. But you could look at D and see that it is also not going to be correct. But let's move on. And then finally, there's finding the main idea for fiction and poetry, which is not going to be quite as simple as the nonfiction passages. For these passages, I do actually recommend that you read the whole thing because you're going to need to sort of synthesize everything in the passage into, well, the main idea, for lack of a better word. Let's start with some prose, that is to say, some fiction that's not poetry, and I'll show you what this synthesis looks like. So I do always recommend looking at the second sentence to get some context. Here it says we have these siblings who just moved in with their parents into a house in the countryside, and they call it the White House. That might be important in case we accidentally think it's referring to the White House of the United States of America. Anyway, let's actually read through this. And as I read through, I'll tell you what I'm noticing, and then we'll come up with that synthesis prediction. It was not really a pretty house at all. It was quite ordinary, and my mother thought it was rather inconvenient and was quite annoyed at there being no shelves to speak of and hardly a cupboard in the place. Father used to say that the ironwork on the roof and coping was like an architect's nightmare. So right off the bat, I'm noticing that Mother and father think this house isn't great. They don't like it. They think it's dumb. So I'm going to say mother and father don't like, uh, and I'm referring to the house. I don't need to remind myself of that. But the house, ooh, I told you to get excited about butts. So we're going to have some sort of a contradiction to mother and father not liking it. But the house was deep in the country with no other house in sight. And the children had been in London for 2 years without so much as once going to the seaside, even for a day, by an excursion train. And so the White House seemed to them a sort of fairy palace set down in an earthly paradise. Okay. Yeah, honestly, I could just continue this note and turn that into my prediction. I'm going to say mother and father don't like, but children think it's magical. Boom. And let's just go ahead and use that as our prediction. A. Although their parents believe the house has several drawbacks, the children are enchanted by it. So that does seem to fit. Enchanted would go with thinking it's magical, drawbacks would go with not liking it. So I'll keep A. B. The children don't like the house nearly as much as their parents do. That would be the opposite distractor answer, once again. Each member admires a different characteristic. No, that is not true because mother and father do not like it. D, the house is beautiful and well built, but the children miss their old home. Again, that's not going to work. I would say that is also sort of the opposite because mom and dad would disagree with this, and the children don't ever express this. So our answer is going to be a resounding choice A. And then finally, let's take a look at some poetry here, which for some students can be the most challenging type of passage. And it really depends on the poem, but you're going to need to do some caveman talk.
Do you really think you're a caveman?
What I mean is, you want to break the poem down and put it into simple language you can understand, because with poetry, a lot of the time it's going to be very convoluted and it's usually going to be from, like 100 years ago or whatever. So let's break this thing down. I wish I could remember that first day, first hour, first moment of your meeting me. Okay, so I'm just going to translate this already. I'm going to say, wants to remember meeting. And, you meeting me. So we're speaking to someone here if we put ourselves into the point of view of the speaker. If bright or dim the season, it might be summer or winter for all I can say. So unrecorded did it slip away. So these together are basically saying, I don't remember, which would go with wants to remember. And I'm getting that from if bright or dim the season, it might be summer, winter for all I can say, is basically saying, like, I don't know if it was bright or dim. I don't know what was going on. I just don't remember. So unrecorded did it slip away. Unrecorded, basically like I didn't record it in my mind. Maybe I didn't intentionally take pictures. Were they taking a lot of pictures back in 1881? I don't know. But maybe maybe like writing in your diary or something. But basically, I don't remember. So blind was I to see and foresee, so dull to mark the budding of my tree. Okay, so it is going back to sort of marking, recording. So basically, like not documenting in some way or another. And the budding of my tree, I'm going to assume is like the budding of this relationship that would not blossom for yet many a May. So, maybe we didn't know this relationship would be so important. I don't know. Tree seems pretty important. And to be clear, I wouldn't necessarily be writing all of this down in my notes. This is just me showing you what's happening in my brain so you can kind of follow along. And as far as synthesizing, it is supposed to be the main idea, right? So let's take these and synthesize the main idea. And I'm going to say, speaker wants to remember beginning of relationship. And it does say, remember that first day. So remember meeting, but did not record. Something like that. That's going to be our prediction. So A, the speaker celebrates how the passage of time has strengthened a relationship. No. B, because the speaker did not anticipate how important a relationship would become, she cannot recall how the relationship began, which she regrets. So that works. We have the regret, wants to remember. There's a tinge of regret here. I didn't necessarily write that word, but I kind of feel that. Can't recall how the relationship begun, wants to remember the beginning. And then because she did not anticipate how important it would become, so that kind of goes to the recording. Like in the beginning, she didn't know it was going to become important. So she wasn't, writing diary entries or, having portraits made or whatever. So B seems pretty strong. C, as the anniversary of the beginning of an important relationship approaches, that would be, I think, out of scope. There's no indication that there's an anniversary coming. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that just based off that first part. And D, after years of neglecting a once valuable relationship, no, that is also out of scope. Out of scope meaning it's literally not mentioned in the passage. So D is out. And yeah, it's going to be choice B for this one. Now, you're definitely going to want to get some practice in. So go ahead and use the link in the description to get signed up for some free practice questions.